Vallabh Bhanshali, welcome to Real Vision. It's an honor to have this conversation with you today.
Absolute honor for me and pleasure. Thank you.
So you have played such a pivotal role in the development of India's capital markets, including founding Enam, one of the country's leading investment banks, serving as a Reserve Bank of India board member, and acting as a mentor to really an entire generation of Indian entrepreneurs. So we have a lot to unpack today, but I'd like to start really current, if I may, and begin with the issue of cryptocurrencies. I've heard you talk about them, and you sound incredibly open-minded about the possibilities around this digital asset class. What are you seeing there?
Very interesting. If you look at what's been happening in India in adoption of technology, you would probably understand where I'm coming from. And so India is probably amongst the topmost countries when it comes to digitalization. It's Aadhar program. So, between the Prime Minister and, some of the think tanks, very noble people, they thought of what they call the Jam Trinity, which is a bank account for the poor called Jan Dhan, Aadhar, which is an authentication identification platform, again, a digital platform, and then mobile. So they saw that without communication and without direct reach, all the government programs were not having the impact that they intended to and had the potential to. So since India became one of the earliest adopters and massive adopters of mobile, smartphones, internet, and then the cheapest broadband, platform in the world. And therefore, few of these people coming together built what is called an India stack, meaning for health, for accounts, for, financial needs, etc. And therefore, they saw that this is very essential. Now, once you had that kind of understanding that, we can do very well building digital platforms, one of the adoptions of digital platforms is a cryptocurrency. Now, a cryptocurrency, if you think of as an asset class, is one thing. A cryptocurrency which substitutes the physical currency, what is called more, probably in the tech world as stable coins. That's one great adoption of, cryptocurrency. So when we say that, like all good financial markets, you should have several asset classes. And as long as the world is now recognizing that cryptocurrencies as asset classes, may have some relevance, cryptocurrencies as currencies of exchange, no central bank loves it because for obvious reasons. Now, eventually what plays out is going to be somewhere in the middle. So India has already talked about it. India may grow very, very fast in the digital currency. And I think they have thought of creating regulation. The regulation is not yet out on cryptocurrencies in recognition that, it's good to have several asset classes. And, what the rules should be for cryptocurrencies as asset classes, where the risks are well understood by investors. That's all that the government will be worried about. As long as they can make sure that it is not threatening to become a parallel currency of any kind, it's okay. But you will see India move majorly in creating its own cryptocurrency or digital currency or a stable coin. It's early days. So China, India, both are likely to be very major countries in this respect.
So you see it working in tandem and fitting in to the existing fiat world as opposed to being an alternative?
I think it will coexist. I mean, if you've seen the usage of cash, it doesn't matter. Singapore tried to, go cashless in 2000. And China, US, different countries, you can't fight cash. People like to feel the cash. And so these are behavior patterns that will take time to change. And therefore, I do not see complete substitution, but it's a wonderful product for some reasons for my investments, etc., I happen to be having a ringside seat for this. But there's a huge efficiency. The cost of handling currency is massive, both for banks and the central bank. And therefore, as you bring this in, even if you can bring that down by 25%, 30%, and the volatility, what we call the speed of that money, is huge. The velocity of this digital currency is many, many times that of the other currency. So that helps the economy.
Does it help reach those who haven't been participating? I know the issue of unbanked is big. Do you believe that it can help accelerate, bring down costs to participating in the economy for those who are right now left out?
Absolutely. So, Central Bank of India, Reserve Bank of India, that is, has taken upon itself to become a leader in all these things. So the way the banking platform improve, we have a payment system called UPI. UPI, the cost of doing a financial transaction using the UPI platform is probably one of the lowest in the world. In the US, a transaction of that kind probably would be 20, 30, 40 times the cost. And one estimate says that by 2026, the value of those transactions, just the commission saved, could be $500 billion in India. It has become so popular. So they see that you will have a payment platform for all these payments up to say 5,000 or 10,000 rupees, and then for all the payments below that, which have a huge cost because they're small transactions. But by bringing in an electronic platform, the cost of that will come down tremendously. Plus, India was able to launch one of the most successful GST programs in the world. It didn't cause inflation, and it's a very robust platform already. So the formalization of the economy is growing beyond anybody's expectations, and we may have an occasion to talk about the implications of that. Now, even when the smaller transactions, which are kind of exempt from GST, once this formalization happens, all of them start getting captured. They may not get taxed really, but they will get taxed somewhere in the chain. So it's very interesting. So they are extremely keen to bring in this kind of digital currency. And once they have their own stable digital currency, it may be easier to permit, cryptocurrencies of different kinds at the side. Then they know that the common man is not at risk. Common man will not be tempted. It's a very interesting approach. One, of course, has to see how it all plays out.
Yes, well, it is so brand new, and we've seen the peril of that. With I don't know if you're following the difficulties with Terra Luna and all the fallout from that. I think that sort of feeds into a culture of fear around some of these. This larger experiment, but certainly cryptocurrencies. Have you been following that? What are your thoughts on that?
Some of it, but I would not like to. I don't have any kind of authority on what is happening globally, but I'm keenly interested in what's happening in India, and so
your view stands in contrast to a lot of the traditional. The view from the U.S. investment bankers and the sort of way the U.S. is approaching it.
So, it's surprising that while US has a lot of, tech leaders, they define the world actually. If you see adoption of digital in the US, for example, e-commerce with e-commerce giants like Walmart or Amazon and whatnot, the penetration of e-commerce in the US is not all that great. And this is, whatever spurt it got during the COVID period. So I see a mindset that one of the social adoption, second is the Californian companies are technology leaders, how they're able to create platforms and which are being adopted in different degrees by different countries. So the investment banks will clearly be led by the opportunities they see. And the thinking is shaped. Also, the investment banks in the US are used to very large balance sheets, almost unmatched anywhere else except maybe Nomura. And nowhere else in the world, you have balance sheets of that size. And I mean, that created its own problem, in the GFC. But so I think the whole business model thinking is very different in the US. Whereas in India, the investment banks are not that large. And particularly I, as a banker, was so aligned to developing India. And therefore, I may be sounding very different from a typical investment bank.
Tell me more about that. When you say you were aligned in developing India, how did that influence the decisions that you made?
I really don't know how the genesis was, but uh, I came accidentally into investment banking. I was a practicing accountant, and but then I discovered I was academically bright as an accountant, but emotionally it wasn't my scene. And I went out into the cold. I said, I will do anything but not accounting. And then way back in 1981, 82, stock markets were not a popular place. I mean, they were moribund and whatever. You just couldn't think about having a career in the stock market. But I, encouraged by my brother, he said, oh, you were a good head for finance and investments and so on. And however small, but why don't you try your luck? The expectation, ambition were small. So I came into it. But along the way, somewhere, I had some spiritual experiences. And then I felt so great about India's traditions. And then my father had a great, he was an extraordinary person. And we saw him have great empathy for poor people. And to see that, look, we need not be so poor. The glory of India was something that I knew about. And I said that, look, forget, we were 25, 30% of the world. And today we are so miserable in almost every respect. We need to do something about it. And therefore, as Maggie, I was so mad but so convinced about India that in 1991, even before economic reforms and liberalization was announced, I came to US in April 1991, and I met investment banks on the Wall Street. I said that I am here to tell you that all of you will come to India. That how India and US will be the two defining countries for the world. And then I got a chance to work on a lot of new sectors that emerged due to liberalization. Amongst the earliest was IT sector. And, I was a banker for Infosys. And then, we did several milestone transactions for Infosys. And like that, sector after sector, we got a chance, and we had great passion that, okay, here is a new sector opening up. Here are telecom cables. People understand that how big telecom will be in India, and can we help those companies? So we did, 4 companies, 5 companies as the sector opened up for them, educated the investors and the country about, the potential of those companies, helped those companies raise rounds and rounds of capital. And it went on for a long time. It was a swan song. And then I worked with the government.
It sounds like when you were deciding who to help and bring these companies to market and get them the capital they needed to grow, it wasn't just purely a monetary decision. You weren't saying, I'm going to invest in this because I'm going to make a lot of money off this. You had in your mind that this was going to be good for the country. There was something patriotic about what you were doing.
Well, I think there's a large dose of this patriotism. And because I'll give you an example of it, it was quite true. Then I saw that in 91, the government decided that we will divest some of our companies. But they really didn't know because it was all very new. The capital markets were not that deep. But then I saw that, I could help them think through. And I went to the government and I said, I will work free for you. But unlocking this capital, however small it is, that a country which was facing budget deficits, that was meaningful capital. Some of those companies were wonderful companies. And if they got public interest, they would become more efficient. And as many of them did go on to become a lot more efficient because of their public status. So for a number of years, I did that. And no government company wanted to go to the market without me. It came to a situation. Then there came a point where too many companies were going public and we weren't really treated well, and I stopped doing that. But number of companies I would have acted in that manner. So we did see that, and it served us in great state. This, commitment to our work, commitment to our country, it gave me huge monetary benefits, even if it was not my primary goal. So we were quite okay with that. To us, it is mathematical.
Do you feel like the investor class now, if you look at VC investor class, venture capital, private equity, have they lost their way? Is there too much focus on the monetary goals and not enough purpose built into what they're doing?
Well, I don't like to think like that. Maybe we were outliers. And I think if you are allocator of capital, you have to be an efficient allocator of capital, particularly if you've taken money from investors. You owe it to them to do what you promised them to do. So I don't want to sit on judgment over them. But I do have a feeling that the old money in India, the established industrial houses, they probably did not become bigger venture capitalists than they should have. But that itself would have, they understood the country so much better. And instead of feeling threatened or not paying attention to, those companies, India is already a fantastic startup culture now. But maybe we could have done that 5-7 years earlier, and the game would have been very different. The story would have been very different. So I don't think each to his own, and I do respect that they have investors, and they may have a mandate which they have to follow. But having said that, I think once you get too greedy, and some of it reflected in the IPOs that we had in the US, and we had IPOs in India in last year, and how those stocks have come off 30%, 40%, 50%. And I do think that the sponsors, the PE firms and the VC firms, they were probably maybe too exploitative in pricing their IPOs.
Spoken like a true original chartered accountant. There's something about that background that does give you discipline when you're looking at balance sheets and the future, right?
Yeah, I'm sure it has become intuitive now.
So you mentioned being aware of sort of having a front seat to what's happening in some of the digital assets. Does that also cross over to the metaverse and NFTs? Are you investing in those sort of what I would consider frontier areas?
No, I'm not invested in them, but I've invested in tech companies, which may be playing an important role in these things.
Have you always had a growth mindset and an eye to look at the future? Because these are very new areas.
I'm not being impolite if I say I have a growth mindset, but my growth mindset is a lot more about human potential. As a matter of fact, a lot of my work, I actually sold off my investment bank primarily to focus on things bigger than money and business, and which is all about human potential and happiness. So, in that sense, the growth mindset, and I think India has a big role to play. And I think there are two things that are required before your economic prosperity. I mean, before your happiness can really get a chance, which is you have to have good defense and you have to have certain level of economic prosperity. To the extent that this economic prosperity is important, and that economic prosperity is important to build a good defense system, you have to pay equal attention to economic prosperity. And I think I continue to do that in different ways. But that is not the primary goal. The primary goal really is that, a happier world, which doesn't require economic prosperity beyond a point.
So what are you investing in? What areas do you see as helping build up that economic prosperity in India?
So, say, for example, a large part of our population lives in rural India. And what can we do for them? So I support programs which improve the water availability and better crops availability to them. And again, program management is very, very important there. So the experience of several businesses and investment banking, we try and take to those areas. That the governments are trying to do it forever, but the last mile is always a problem for the government. Now, how can you improve the last mile? A lot of the programs in the world don't succeed because they are not demand driven. The private enterprise is fantastic that they're demand driven. Consumer is the boss. And then, catering to consumer because the consumer is the motivation. And consumer understands. And that's where, the great companies of today's, how they dumb it down that the consumer can get what the consumer wants and they're happy to pay for it in one way or the other. But that doesn't happen in the government programs everywhere. So that the eventual last mile, the benefit gets dictated and designed by some bureaucrat, by some ideologue somewhere. And how to invest in systems, processes, NGOs, the nonprofits, to make that happen. I take serious interest and I'm doing my bit in that area.
Do you also still invest in companies and startups in the areas where you've been active before?
Not very actively, but I supported a couple of funds who are doing a very good job of this. So I became early investors in those and encouraged them. So they are doing some very, very good work. I have a clutch of investments, but I am not as active investor as I used to be now.
So where do you think India's future growth will come from? What areas are you bullish on, and are you optimistic when it comes to sort of building that prosperity?
So if digital is the new oil, India will be a leader in it, I can tell you. The way we conceived of this payment platform and authentication platform, that is going to enable delivery of so many services in the most efficient manner at very, very low cost. So I think India in this whole digitalization, in one of my companies already, we find now countries coming to us that, oh, you're involved in building these platforms for India. Why don't you come and build those? So some of these platforms that India and its companies have built will become, global products. And this is still just the beginning. Let me just tell you a small story or something that happened. Take vaccination. India has done 2 billion vaccines. They've delivered 2 billion vaccines. They're a huge program. But that's one part. So getting the vaccine and delivering it is one thing. But its tracking, its record keeping, its consumer experience is world class. Even in the US, to get a vaccine certificate, maybe a handwritten vaccine certificate. In India, you get instant certification, which you can store in a public storage created by the government. Now, for a poor man, he doesn't have to invest in either Apple or Google storage. Government has created a low-cost storage where all these documents of various kinds and a whole stack is being built will get collected there. All this will get data analyzed for public good. And therefore, slowly the health understanding, several other needs understanding that the government will get, and the NGOs, the nonprofits are getting involved in this, which will enable delivering the right health intervention to its people. These will become global products.
So, from what it sounds like, India is accelerated down the road of its citizens having an entire sort of a digital identity.
So you're aware of the Aadhar program, are you?
No.
No. Okay. So forever, as we had very socialistic governments and which was blowing up a lot of money on so-called welfare, but the welfare was not reaching. And this was not reaching because, there was a huge problem with identification and authentication. So we had, as I grew up, we would have to identify ourselves and we would have to get a certificate, signed by a government officer, so-called a gazetted officer. Now, it was a huge challenge to, if I had my examination mark sheet, I had to get it countersigned by somebody before the Xerox, came into being. So that mindset was holding us back. Then in 2008, Nandan Nilekani of Infosys, proposed something. And then it didn't really get the impetus until Modi came. So it was launched, but it didn't get the impetus. After Modi came, it got a huge impetus. So it became one of the three pillars of a bank account for the poor, authentication, which is Aadhar. It's like a social security number in the US. There is an Aadhar number. But the whole program has been created for a much larger population. 95% of the people now have an Aadhar authentication at 1/10 the cost in a very short period. And that is now given a digital identity to virtually every Indian. And now new platforms are being created, which using that platform will give them services. Now, what it has done is, the government rolled out what is called a direct benefit transfer. That instead of, this going through intermediaries from the central government to the provincial government, etc., there were leakages everywhere. So during COVID, for example, the government had to make a transfer to the poor citizens. They could do it with the press of a button. Money transferred in your account. So this is going to happen at a massive scale. So when I go for a vaccination program, whoever is the agency, they can pull up my record that, this was the first shot I took in this time at this place, and this was the vaccine I took. Whatever the policy, this is the second vaccine that I can take. It's a mixed vaccine, the same vaccine. So this kind of, country which is not very literate yet, but the people are becoming digitally literate. They know their rights, how to go about it, and they ask the right questions. So this is going to happen with education, this is going to happen with health, this is going to happen with other social services. And this experience of speed, of low cost, is going to become a global product. Some of the advanced countries would like to have it.
It's especially interesting because this is happening in what is one of the largest democracies in the world. Because elsewhere, there are concerns about privacy, about centralized control of your digital identity, the rights of a consumer over their information. We've seen regulation in Europe, which has been more aggressive than in the US about the rights of someone and their information. How has that discussion been playing out in India, given the fact that this is happening rapidly?
India has its own challenges. And the Supreme Court said that the government cannot enforce on a citizen that they must get an Aadhar card. But what happened was the market won. When people saw that someone with an Aadhar card, his life is so much simpler, people simply went and got it. So some of this, has to reach a critical mass because, this privacy is so hard to define.
Mm.
People are out there putting themselves on Facebook, but they'll talk privacy.
No, it's so true. So is the program owned by the government, or are there large tech companies that are essential in the process?
So there is an agency, there's an institution which is independent of the government, though of course is sponsored by the government with its own law and its privacy and authority. Just as we have an election commission, we have a judiciary system, which are sponsored by the government, but they have their own rights and their own jurisdiction. So this is also the unique identity authority of India. It is enacted by the parliament, and it has its own authority and its jurisdiction. So this is something that people will experience over time. That has this been abused for anything, or has it been only used for good? That is a record that you have to build. It is not only by contract, it's by intent that these things are done.
Absolutely. And so important as we all sort of, the genie is out of the box. So it's happening anyway. So it will be in some ways, what's happening in India will be a case study for those who are looking at this and pushing for this. When we're looking at this rapid digitalization of the country, what Indian companies, tech companies, are a must own in people's portfolios that are going to be able to ride that wave?
Well, I generally avoid talking any individual stock, but Reliance has become a fantastic platform. the Geo platform with their telecom, and I have worked for many years as a banker with that family, and no one raised more money for them, while we were in business. So we were at the forefront, and with them through thick and thin. So I know the capability of the company. So with the largest telecom, market share, and with partners like Facebook, uh, they will be fantastic company, and they're going to penetrate very deep into various consumption channels. So that would be a very interesting company to own. We have had, special companies like for fashion, we have Nike, or for shopping, Flipkart is not listed yet, but they will get listed. We have some of the payment companies that have come into the market. And so may not be must own at this point of time, but some of the must owns will come at some point of time. Some of the banks are probably a proxy for that. Say State Bank of India, for their banking footprint, plus what they're doing on technology at some point of time. So once the digital currencies come out, I think it'll be an opportunity for some of the banks to really take early leadership in that and build a lot of products around it. So you're going to get proxies like that. You may not get direct technology companies. Adopters of those technologies may have a competitive advantage, and therefore uh, owned in that owned on that account.
We saw earlier this spring that there was a large scale merger in the banking sector. Do you expect to see more consolidation? Is it important to have scale?
Absolutely. I definitely think so. That I see India become so big, and scale will be very important, because you will have to invest in two things. You will have to invest massively in technology, and you will have to invest in consumer experience, again, using technology and otherwise. So the variety of needs and the variety of consumers that any major company would want to cater to and will need to cater to will necessitate size. So, there is this end-to-end experience that the consumer can get. The consumer's needs used to be just, putting money in a bank and, putting it in a fixed deposit, term deposit or something like that. But that has changed massively. So from housing needs to personal loans to vehicle loans to health loans to whatnot, and variety of savings products they need, from risk assets to non-risk assets to insurance. And so it'll be convenient for the supplier and for the vendor and for the consumer if it all can come on one platform. So HDFC took the lead in this, and they're already the second largest financial conglomerate in the country, and they're one of the top 10 in market cap in the world now. Or when they're merged, they will be. So on, so others will have to follow.
Given how far along India is in this process, and how many have signed up for the platform and everything that's happening, would you expect Indian companies to rival or surpass or take a global leadership on this, not just serving the domestic market, but internationally as well?
So far, we have seen, say, software services companies, which are now global leaders. After Accenture, TCS, and Infosys are very large, very respected companies. So, but they are still only service companies. But you're going to see technology adopters, the new startups who are working in semiconductors, in photo optronics, or in drones, things like that. And the government has now a program or to incentivize, certain kinds of companies. Some of them are very promising. So, because India is now going to be a leader in digitalization, it has its own unique needs. Some of these companies, it's too early for me to say it will happen or not, but potentially I do think that some of these companies will become, globally significant companies. Whether they become, global leaders and giants is hard to say, but they will definitely become significant companies, just as, Reliance has become a significant company, the HDFC has become a significant company. Some of our infra companies have become, significant companies. So I think that will be so.
It certainly seems that they're working a little bit more in coordination, or at least the government and the private sector are moving in the same direction, as opposed to elsewhere where they are at loggerheads with each other. And there's a lot of tension in terms of what should happen, and a lack of regulation.
So, for example, it does happen in many countries. In Japan, it happened a lot. In Korea, it has happened. In the US, in the defense and the healthcare sector, in the pharma companies, the government sponsors a lot of their programs. But India, I think of late, the government of India introduced a program called Production Linked Incentive. It's been one of the best programs rolled out by any government in India, where they're identifying a sector. So instead of giving across the board, if you make investments in industry, will give you an incentive. Instead of that, they're identifying industry, they're identifying candidates, and they're very liberal and very predictable in giving those incentives. So the companies have loved it. And so, to that extent, some of these areas, government and private sector are working. It's a honeymoon just now, I can say.
The Indian equity markets have held up fairly well considering what's been happening elsewhere, down around 5.5% year to date. Do you think these valuations make sense given the inflation we're seeing and the upward pressure on input costs?
See, businessmen know how to tackle these best. We are outside the system, but they're inside the system, and they have to survive. And then I've seen some lot of these companies face a lot of these upheaval and volatility in the past. So from the inside, it is not as bad as it may seem from outside. Number one. Number two, I think India. I'm not defending the valuations for all the companies, but generally, I think there is a case for Indian to be more bullish on Indian companies. The valuations have got corrected, but there's a demand and supply. So as the Indian saver is wanting to lock into equities, and the record in the last 10 years has been very good, they are going to defend those valuations, even if the foreigners have exited in a major way. They have the highest amount of equity divestment that we have seen in the last 20 years. We have already matched that divestment from the foreigners, and the markets are still holding. So the point is that India will remain amongst the fastest, if not the fastest growing economy for several years. And there are few reasons for it. There are few countries in the world, or significant size economies, where you will find that all the three balance sheets are in good shape. That in India, the banking sector was under stress and the corporate sector was under stress. Both of them are very healthy now. The Indian government and the India as a country, we had three problems in the past. We were energy deficient. We have the most wonderful neighbors, so the defense was a major headache, and so defense continues to be a problem. And food. In the 60s and the 70s, we had to import a lot of food. Today, we are abundantly surplus in food. And as far as energy is concerned, as I said, that today the exports and the invisible exports, the software exports and remittances and all, can easily take care of the subsidies that we have to provide for the oil that we still have to import. More importantly, it already seems that India is going to become a very significant power, if not the world leader, in the new energy. So on hydrogen, on solar, on wind, particularly solar and hydrogen, we are taking very major steps. Mukesh Ambani has the founder of Reliance. He has gone out to the world and said that we will be the least cost hydrogen producer in the world. We already have scaled up. Our renewable targets are running 5 to 6 years ahead of the targets we have given to the world. So once we have that energy issue solved, food issue solved, hopefully, and the last thing is the tax buoyancy that we are seeing with this digitalization, formalization, etc. It's unbelievable. The numbers that are coming, particularly post-COVID, in this calendar year, are extremely impressive, which means the government balance sheet is healthy. With this, the growth potential is so much more predictable. In the past, we always had 2 steps forward, 1 step back. The last several years, we're now seeing a steady progress. So some of this is giving a lot of confidence to Indian equity investors, whether some of them are abroad and a lot of them in India who are not that uncomfortable valuations.
India's prospects, as you just described, reasons to be bullish and very optimistic, but it's happening against a very perilous geopolitical time right now. We know, and controversy, limiting food exports because of the food crisis, concerns about famine elsewhere. Controversy around energy. Who do you get it from? Do you follow global sanctions or not? All of these strains, and that's just touching on two, have prompted JP Morgan's head Jamie Dimon, there's just this week warning of an economic hurricane. Goldman Sachs president John Waldron saying we're facing an unprecedented confluence of shocks to the world system. Do you share concerns about the geopolitical situation and any fallout from that? What are the risks that you're worried about?
Some of these geopolitical risks are, hard to predict. We couldn't imagine that Russia will, be in Ukraine for such a long period of time, or Turkey suddenly making sounds and complicating the whole picture. Some of these are very hard to tell, and these are really like black swan events, and it's hard to tell what will happen. You can't divest in the certainty that these things will happen, and nor can you prepare for them in some manner. So depending upon one's risk appetite, you're already seeing people, liquidate their holdings of various kinds. Given that, the way India is assessing the situation, because of its relationship with Russia, because of its ability to import oil from Russia, where it has explained its position to the world now, US, UK, Europe, they've all understood where India is, that, India has its own interests, and wherever it is. Secondly, if we look at, the crisis in the world, what exactly one has to import and export, we are not that bad, because India is a large resource country. So, some of our import needs are different from other countries. So we have to import oil, for sure. So which is one vulnerability. But we don't have to import food. We don't have to import so many other things. And then we have an export juggernaut in terms of our software exports. So they're already at $200 billion and then growing at, some close to double digit. A new platform is emerging called SaaS, which is, software exports of a different kind. The number of private equity investors who are invested in SaaS companies, and a number of them have told me that these will be larger, much larger than software exports. Maybe in 5-7 years, it could be a number as large as $1 trillion. So India, how nations get their own time in, they get their good moment. India seems to be in that, where things are, while difficult, they're less difficult for the country than others. Defense will continue to be a major problem, and therefore some of its budget will go there. The rest of the things are falling in place.
The $1 trillion, what, for those who are not familiar, what is the nature of that next wave of export that you're referring to? So it's not software as services. What does that involve?
So that involves software of a different kind. So software as a service. And so just as, mainframes became PCs, and then the PCs became, more run by software than hardware, and that software became large software and small software, it is the smaller software. So just as, bundling, packaging of, things is becoming possible in the digital world, you carve out things to, smaller. So, the cost of a major company, because their manpower cost is high, the space is no more that a relevant a factor, but manpower is very high. So, you carve out pieces of that, and that becomes very large. As the telecom infrastructure, bandwidth, etc., become more stable, you're going to find that the world over will want to do this. So, let me put this in a little more perspective. That this digitalization and technology adoption is a must now for every country in the world. Within the US also, you will find that while the financial industry was at the cutting edge, maybe to some extent retail, but the number of companies which were caught short during the COVID is such a large number. Large fraction was not ready, but that was the only way they could survive. So all of them are building their engines. Something similar is happening the world over. Now you need manpower. as only a particular kind of manpower can provide those services in a hurry. India just happens to be that country. For the last 30 years, we've been developing this industry. We produce a large number of engineers. So we have the ecosystem, just as, TSMC in Taiwan has now become the chip supplier of the world. And, other examples. So India just happens to be that country where the technology needs of the world can be met at the least possible cost in volume. There's no other country that will come that we can see on the horizon today. Some of it will go out, but people have tried to, develop software exports in Philippines and other countries. It hasn't happened because it's like a whole ecosystem is necessary.
Absolutely, and we talk all the time that it is a global war for talent, and when you have that in surplus, that's absolutely key, and that is the importance of education. I know something that you are in your time now spending a lot of attention and investing a lot in the education system and continuing that.
Absolutely. I think it'll become a major, attraction for the world that new universities are coming up. We are pretty happy with what we have done at Flame University. But the huge potential. So healthcare and education will become major services from India. Indian doctors are, prime doctors in so many countries in the world. And a lot of them are, starting hospitals here. And once the government, aligns with it, the government already has a vision that we should have a top class in every block or district, what we call a unit of a province, that in every community we should have a top hospital. And then medical tourism, that at least in every state we should have, every state of the country, at least 4 or 5 hospitals with facilities for tourism, medical tourism, that they can come and stay. And some of the new structures that are being built in India give that hope that whether it's a railway station, whether it's an airport, whether some of the new monuments, that we are now understanding world standards. So I think in 5-7 years that could be possible.
Reflecting back on your career, when you talk about building NM and investing and being a mentor to entrepreneurs, you often talk about the importance of values. What are the values that you're referring to?
Let me give an example. When vaccines were a big shortage in the world, India gave 60 million vaccines to the world, 50 countries. Now, what sort of diplomatic advantage we would have got out of this? But it comes naturally to India. It's hard to imagine that India was, such a prosperous country for so long. It never invaded anybody. A Chinese ambassador said that China was conquered by India without firing an arrow or a bullet by sending Buddha's teaching there. So this is hard to understand, that values are not imposed. They are not a matter of lecturing. They are imbibed and cultivated by a culture, by a society. It takes generations. So in an Indian home, when a guest comes, he's called an angel. Atithi Devo Bhava, they say. A guest is an angel, is a god. So this respect for fellow beings is so important. But since India lost its confidence, first through the colonial rule, then by its own government, this confidence is reviving. So the change in political ideology from, always looking at governance and ideology from a Western point of view, nothing wrong. It worked for the West, it's fine. But we needed something else. We are an ancient culture, and very, very talented culture. But if I'm a poet, but if I don't recite in English and I'm not valued, what happens to my poetry and talent? Some of it is going away at a very rapid speed in India. So the talent that is coming out due to the confidence of the parents is extraordinary. And this will also bring the value system. I do like to think that if the world had to become rich and prosperous and happy by American standards, it'll be a disaster in 20 years. We will consume so much of our environment, it will be a disaster. I'm working on a 25-year plan. I don't know how long I'll live it, but I do see that in 25 years' time, if India says we will become $6,000, $8,000 per capita We are around $2,000 now, and I do not see why we will not be. But at that 6,000 or 7,000 or $8,000 per capita, can we provide a lifestyle, a standard of life, which is about $15,000 a year? $15,000 per capita. That's enough. This mad race, I mean, it's a paradox that we want to consume less, we want to consume more, but we want to create a sustainable planet. There is nobody talking about consuming less. So I think this whole model that is emerging in India at a time when it needs building itself up and when the world is in upheaval, is a very poignant moment, I find. And that the value system of India of consuming less, being content with less, very few people realize that India, through its very, very economically miserable period in 60s, 70s, 80s, the average Indian did not feel that miserable. Due to our stoic philosophy, our ability to manage with less, I do hope that we continue to manage with less and teach the world to manage with less and to be happy with more. The second part are the Indian exports of yoga, of its meditation, of its Ayurveda. These are going to produce, because these are all based on nature. You don't need that much synthesis. How you can buy, that kills the manufacturing sector in a way. But that doesn't matter. World can be a happier place with less, the same amount of GDP as today, if we were more efficient about it. That's what I call values. That more is not necessarily good. That's the prime value that we like to teach to our students. And that's the value system that is coming out in all what I talked about, that can I produce the best healthcare at 10% of the cost? Can I produce the best authentication, best digital service at 5% of the cost that US or some of the other countries have? US may be the most expensive, but we are easily half of the smallest cost anywhere else in the world. So being contented is the sum of all values.
It's very wise and comes at a time when I think many people are looking at the situation we're in and feeling like we've lost our way somehow. Some of the developed countries, but the US certainly at the top of that heap, and need to rethink and reconnect with values that we had in the past. So I think that message that you send will resonate with so many who are listening. You also credit meditation. You're very, I think sometimes when we think about investing in the culture of banking and finance and numbers, people don't talk about the sort of spirituality or meditation side of it, but you feel that's been very important to your performance over the years.
I'm sure it helped that, when your profession is known by volatility, if you can remain steady and calm, it definitely helps. I think it's added so much to my life and my work. A lot of my colleagues, a lot of the companies that we worked with, when you take calm to them, it's very, very precious. And I think meditation, it just gives you a perspective that, oh, this is going to change. Don't worry. Don't get carried away. This is also going to change.
We need that now. We are seeing so much volatility. People are losing money. People are stressed out.
We have survived world wars. We have survived nuclear explosions. We have survived so many crises. And you know what? You talked about geopolitics and this, that, etc. I have one perspective. That, we saw the oil crisis in the 70s. Then we have had crisis in the US, which got exported in small measure or large measure. 87, 89, the Asian crisis, then the tech bubble, the global financial crisis, COVID. The speed with which the world has responded to each of the crises has only gone up. So our ingenuity to deal with the problems is improving exponentially, which we cannot see until the crisis hits. We couldn't see that the vaccine could come in 1 year. We couldn't see the masks would go away. And so also in the geopolitics, say, for example, it was hard to, because the mathematical modeling is linear. Human behavior is non-linear. It was hard to say how Kissinger will go and say, all right, forget Tiananmen Square. There's a whole big opportunity for you and us. Let's do business. It brought in the whole deflation for the world and so much prosperity for a country. So very out of the box solutions come out. And the mind is so much more solution oriented now. So many more minds are working in unison, in coordination than ever before in every aspect of life. So what the apparent reading of geopolitics is one thing. But I do think that there are people who are thinking of many, many different ways of dealing with it. And I take courage. I mean, I take, India as a pointer. Particularly in the West, India was being demonized. Oh, you are not, you're siding with Russia because you are not condemning it, etc. We were not condemning it, but we were not approving it. We had our own condition. We are a poor country, or still a poor, better off than before, but poorer than most countries. We have massive oil imports from Russia. If Europe can import 50% of its oil from its energy from, and be holier than thou, that doesn't work. So when we explained our position, we have had all kinds of people now talk to us and be comfortable with our position, which means it's a matter of comfort, creating comfort. This whole geopolitics is out of distrust. There will be people, there will be Kissingers of the world who will create comfort, and we can't see it. So I don't particularly get perturbed by it that, this definitely means doom. And as Buffett and Munger say, that look, there's nuclear explosion, you might as well not talk about investments because the world will come to an end. So the doom scenarios are okay, good to talk about if you like it, but they don't make sense. I don't think in today's world, doom makes any sense. We are a fabulously ingenuous generation, and we're only going to get better. We will create problems for ourselves from time to time, but we'll come out of them.
I can't think of a better, more optimistic way to end this conversation, and I'm going to hang on to that sentiment. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you so much. I may have got carried away with my optimism, but then I'll let the audience judge and forgive me. Thank you very much for having me.
We need that. We need that optimism.
Thank you very much.
That was a fascinating conversation. And my biggest takeaway is that international investors need to have a more nuanced understanding of what's happening in the Indian economy. It's not enough just to bet on the emerging middle class. 3 trends to watch: the formalization of the economy, bringing those informal workers into the regulated economy. Bhanshali gave an example about the implementation of the goods and services tax as something to watch. The digital transformation of the economy. He sees India's record of handling the COVID-19 vaccinations as the tracking, record keeping, and consumer experience as really providing a platform for further building out digital identities and healthcare delivery, which is really a really interesting trend. And the embrace of digital currencies, cryptocurrencies. The country's been moving really rapidly, and Bhanshali sees this as a way to bring down costs and remove barriers that will enable India to pull those citizens more quickly into the banking system. So 3 really interesting trends. And Bhanshali clearly not worried about the short-term pullbacks. He's focused on the long game, and he believes that these trends are going to build India.
We hope you
into
enjoyed
a
the
major
video.
economic
At
powerhouse.
Real Vision, we help you understand the complex world of
At Real
finance,
Vision, we help you understand the complex world of finance, business, and global economy with in-depth analysis from real
experts.
experts.
Join the revolution
at realvision.com.